Okay, everyone, I think we're going to get started with our next panel. So again, we'd like to thank Dr. Hunter Reed for being with us here today. As Sarah said, that provides a very good lead-in to this next panel, where we're going to get into some of the details of the federal role in addressing food and housing insecurity, specifically among college students. I'm going to introduce our panel real quickly. I'll start from your left and move right. That's also the order they'll be speaking in. First, we have Amy Ellen Duke-Benfield from the Center for Law and Social Policy. Amy Ellen is a senior policy analyst at CLASP's Center for Post-Secondary and Economic Success. Her focus is access to and success in post-secondary education and training for low-income students, particularly adults and out-of-school youth. She analyzes and advocates for better federal and state education policies and provides technical assistance. She also directed CLASP's Benefits Access for College Completion initiative, which sought to increase access to public benefits and financial aid for low-income students. To her right, we have Katherine Sydor from the U.S. Department of Education. Katherine is a senior policy advisor in the Office of the Undersecretary at the U.S. Department of Education. She earned her master's degree in public affairs at the La Follette School of Public Affairs at the University of Wisconsin-Madison. Previously, she has worked in Congress for Senator Jeff Merkley and Representative David Obey. Katherine is from Wisconsin and earned her BA at the University of Minnesota in the Twin Cities. Next, we'll have Chase Sackett from the U.S. Department of Housing and Urban Development, the Office of Policy Development and Research there. Chase is a Presidential Management Fellow in HUD's Office of Policy Development and Research. He wrote HUD's 2015 report, Barriers to Success, Housing Insecurity for U.S. College Students. He has coordinated subsequent work on housing insecurity, including co-leading the new interagency working group on public benefits for post-secondary success. He has a JD from Yale Law School and a BA from Washington University in St. Louis. Finally, we'll have Alan Shannon from the USDA Food and Nutrition Services in the Midwest. Alan has nearly 30 years of experience with FNS nutrition assistance programs and every aspect of public relations, including media relations, community engagement, and event planning. He's also written on food, restaurants, travel, and culture for a variety of publications, including the Chicago Sun-Times and Chicago Tribune publications. We'll start with Amy Ellen Duke-Benfield.
I would say an integral role for us, an integral place that the benefits discussion should be going on. I think there's a growing understanding, everyone in this room would agree, that there isn't enough aid to meet the needs that students have, and because of that, many basic needs are going unmet. A growing policy dialogue has emphasized giving access to low-income students to a more comprehensive set of benefits, and that includes public benefits like SNAP, child care, WIC, Medicaid being another good one, especially as we see the populations on college campuses be increasingly non-traditional students who are eligible for those types of programs. I think that we can't just continue to think about, we still have a challenge as we talk about free college, in that for so many of our students, the living expenses are what really kills them in terms of being able to persist and complete. And yet we have a set of supports out here represented by some of my colleagues on the stage here that can serve as very helpful tools and ways for a student to pivot to that graduation day and a good job, and when they no longer need that support for food or for childcare, but that this is a temporary support, that's a necessary support, and should not be a stigmatized support, so to speak, so that more students can persist and complete. As we've heard this morning, half of all students are facing food and housing insecurity, and students of color are particularly hit hard. 31% of African Americans and 23% of Latino students face high levels of food insecurity. Because of this, I think it's necessary that we talk directly and honestly about what are those benefits that are eligible, that are available to a range of students. I think there's been a lot of talk about food banks and how do we meet direct emergency housing needs and that sort of thing. But in terms of the long run, of a dependable support that students should be able to access are those that reside in HHS, USDA for food stamps, HUD for housing, and then I also know many of you on this campus, many of you in the audience from being in the field for a long time, working on student-parent issues, know that students who are parents are eligible for a lot more public benefits programs than others. Just for those of you who might not be as familiar with the rules around eligibility for this population, that programs like WIC and TANF, or what we called welfare in old days, it's good to be here in Milwaukee, one of the birthplaces of some of the more draconian welfare policies of the 90s. But now we come back around and are much more focused on folks having access to education and training, and that includes for single parents and being able to use TANF supports for that. Other programs are indeed open to childless adults, despite what some people think. But obviously the most generous supports, like the Earned Income Tax Credit or SNAP, go to those with families. The one thing that I would underscore for all of you is that few receive all programs that they're eligible for. There are questions on the FAFSA about 5, and now there will be 6 programs, whether or not you receive or have received within the last 24 months one of those 5 public benefits programs pushes you into the Simplified Needs Test, or the process by which you may qualify for an automatic 0 EFC or maximum Pell Grant. But what we know in looking at those data, and I appreciate what Katherine said, we should be looking at these data regularly because they're on your campus, and you can go find out then, for instance, all those who applied for financial aid, what percentage are receiving SNAP. And from research that CLASP has done, we have learned that there's a gross under-reporting of that because students aren't really sure why they're being asked, and there's concern about will they get dinged, will their family get dinged, that sort of thing if they answer in the affirmative or answer truthfully to those questions. But the fact is that that is a place to start to get a sense of eligibility on your campus. And then, as I said, another challenge around the public benefits issue is that some programs have capped funding. How many of you have heard about child care waiting lists? A lot of people are raising their hands, some 2 hands, because those waiting lists can be several years long in some places. Or the same thing around housing. I know in New York City, the waiting list for NYCHA, I sometimes hear for NYCHA public housing is like 5 to 10 years. And so those programs, you know, it's not as if I can say that public benefits are a panacea for students being able to support their persistence and completion, but for many more students than we do think is possible, they can access public benefits. And so why don't more students access benefits? Probably for a lot of the same reasons some of you might not have thought about public benefits. There's a lack of information. There is a rule that says college students are not eligible for SNAP, but there are 10 exceptions around that rule, but people hold on to that. College students aren't eligible for SNAP, and so that's what they think. Applying is often time-consuming, and students who are low income don't have time to run all over their community, oftentimes with poor transportation options to get what they need. There's also the stigma and other cultural barriers around public assistance, and we have a problem around higher education and public benefits policies not being well aligned that I'll talk about in a second. So, how are colleges helping students access benefits? I'm going to talk more about this tomorrow on a panel with my esteemed colleagues from Humboldt State and Oregon State University. But I did direct a multi-college initiative across the country that included colleges trying to integrate benefits access into their existing college activities. Angela Johnson is here from Tri-C from Cuyahoga Community College. She's the director of financial aid there, and can talk about how they transformed their financial aid process to actually build in public benefits access so more students could qualify, could apply, have a place to apply on campus for public benefits. So colleges can inform students about the existence of programs. They can help students understand how to apply. They can screen students to determine if they're eligible and to assist them in applying for public benefits. They can assist students in gathering necessary documentation. One of the things that is most challenging around access to public benefits that it does have in common with the FAFSA is that it's really a pain in the neck to have to gather all the documentation that you need to do to have in order to prove that you're poor, and oftentimes that happens repeatedly to that same person. And then there's also actions that colleges that are in pretty deep on this are also following up with students and developing relationships with local benefits offices to find out why students' applications are being turned down, troubleshoot applications, and that kind of thing. So there's a real broad set of real broad roles that that colleges can play. Before I turn it over to my colleagues, I would just say that low-income students face really three main challenges to accessing the benefits to which they're entitled, and that all are going to need to be addressed in order to connect more of them to public benefits, and for us to be able to really talk about a comprehensive system, a comprehensive support system of financial supports. Unfortunately, many public benefits programs simply aren't designed for students, and that's sort of a vestige of us being in a different time. Just like now, Pell doesn't fit many of the non-traditional students that we all serve in the same way. And so what we have is a big misalignment between the president's and the administration's goals around college completion and the anti-poverty goals that have been stated in some of these departments. And so if we're going to hit those goals that we have to start thinking about public benefits and higher education policies in a more congruent, connected way. And that means overcoming some of those barriers that students have. For instance, an example of this is that in some states, you can be low income, attending college full time, but not receive child care benefits because post-secondary attendance by itself is not a qualifier for child care benefits. And so that's an example of where there's a misalignment. Luckily, most states do provide child care assistance for those low-income pursuing post-secondary when there's not a waiting list or that kind of thing. But in some cases, there's a requirement that students work at least 20 hours a week on top of going to school in order to qualify for the subsidy. That's another place where we see there being friction given everything that we know about 20 hours a week and its implications for persistence and completion. Another thing that I would raise, and another issue that I raise that I would encourage all of you to look at in my paper, Bolstering Student Success, Non-Traditional Student Success, it talks about a series of recommendations that we've made around changing public benefits programs to better serve the needs of low-income students. But around the SNAP exceptions, and I know that Alan's going to talk a little bit about this, but it's really important for all of you to know that if the student meets the the income requirements for SNAP and they're receiving federal work study, they are eligible for SNAP. They're then exempt from that exclusion of college students under SNAP. And I would argue that the feds could be doing a much better job educating colleges about that fact, and that colleges have a big responsibility to reach out to all of your students who are receiving federal work study to let them know about their credential eligibility. Another thing I would say is that many of these programs, unfortunately, are financially stretched, particularly after years of the federal funding caps that have gone on under sequestration. And if we're really going to talk about weaving together a comprehensive system of supports for low-income students, we need to advocate for, I said the A word, but I'm not working for the federal government here. We need to advocate for greater expenditures under, for instance, the community for child care development block grant, and that's the primary funding stream for child care for low-income students in the country. Much larger funding stream than C Campus, which funds the on-campus child care. Both of those need to see huge increases in order for child care to be more viable support for low-income students. The same thing around public housing and the waiting lists of thousands, needing to advocate for better funding for those comprehensive supports. And then I also think that it's important to think about, and we're going to talk about this tomorrow around a research agenda, but what will help us prove that benefits are a valuable route to support low-income students. In the Benefits for Access for College Completion initiative we found that students receiving 2 or more public benefits completed more classes than their peers who did not, who had similar income levels. So I just wanted to highlight that. Just real quickly before I turn it over, what can the government do? What can my peers here do? They can better align anti-poverty and higher education policies so that we're all going in the same direction. Do our public benefits policies support the president's and our state governor's goals around college completion? So immediate things can be done. I know some people are saying, well, look, this administration is almost out of here. There's no time to do anything. But actually 6 to 8 months is great time. And I hear that Katherine is busier than ever, so that makes me happy. But I think that we should add information on the studentaid.ed.gov portal, where low-income students go, the free place students can go to find out about federal aid. They should add information about benefits access there. We need to be conducting outreach to all the students receiving federal work study. We also have, in the most immediate place, and I think Sarah may have talked about this, we will be talking about it, is that there are some regulations coming out around the SNAP EBT regs and who qualifies as an allowable or as an eligible brochure or eligible receiver of EBT benefits, and that some of this tightening of the rules will have a negative impact on campus-based grocery stores because it speaks to being able to sell a diversity of goods and that kind of thing. And so that's an opportunity in the next month for us all to lend our voices. I also think that we need to really encourage states to think more expansively about how they classify SNAP ENT programs, because if a student is eligible for SNAP ENT, they are eligible for SNAP. And so that's a way to get around that student bar. And then on the, within ed, I think there are great places within the TRIO programs and student support services and Title III and Title V, where we see so many low-income students concentrated, to just simply inform them about their eligibility for benefits access, and that some colleges are actually doing that and have integrated it into student success services at the local level. And then I also think that the feds can be helpful in terms of using their bully pulpit to educate folks about benefits when they go out and do outreach to high schools and other non-traditional environments. And then also looking at, through experimental sites, further testing the impact of, let's say, benefits received on persistence and completion, or a demo of a school lunch program, testing that and that kind of thing. So I'll wrap it up here. I'm going to be around for the next day and a half, and this is my passion. And I love these people because they're all working very hard on these issues to try to help more low-income students persist and complete.
Thanks, Amy. Ellen, how about you? I do. I just feel like I should just do whatever Ellen tells us. She's got the right idea. So I want to talk about sort of 3 things. I want to talk about, go back to that question that was asked during Kim and Sarah's chat about sort of yes? Okay. I want to go back to that question about the kinds of decisions and sort of arguments that are made in Washington about priorities. I'd like to talk about sort of an ask for you guys as we get ready to do another higher education authorization bill, probably within the next couple of years. And I also want to talk about the interagency work, of course. But before I do that, I want to just again sort of say thanks, to all of you. I want to say especially thanks to Sarah and the Hope Lab team for putting this together. I don't think I can sort of undersell, this is so important. This work that we're all engaged in right here is really critical. I really believe that. I think it's funny that Sarah said that someone was like, do you really think the free and reduced lunch for, why would you say that to Sarah? This is free college. We're all here talking about free college. A couple of years later, it's in the president's budget. There's been bills introducing college in Congress, and we're on a campus where a promise program is being implemented. So I just think that that's such a great example of in a few short years, the kind of change that we can all help make. And so just kudos to them again. And Sarah didn't even hear my thanks, so she's just walking. To go back to this question about the kinds of conversations that we have. So first of all, I should say, like, my portfolio of work as a senior advisor in the Undersecretary's office is really around student loans and financial aid. I spend a lot of my time talking about student loan repayment and about helping get people information about their income-driven repayment plans and all these sorts of things that are maybe way outside the interest area of this group. But I will say, you know, one of the best things that we can do for students to help them repay their loans and stay out of default, stay current, is to help them get through college and get into a job that helps them manage their debt. And so all of this work is connected. When people talk about the student debt crisis, this kind of work can help influence that problem and influence that issue. So I just wanted to sort of make the case that, you know, when people are talking about certain issues on your campus, they're saying, here's what people are really caring about. They're not really worried about students who are hungry. They're not really worried about students who may not have a place to live. Like, that's probably like a really small part of the population, if it is at all. No. I mean, you know, the research that we've seen over the last year, thanks to Sarah, ACCT, we know that this is an issue. Now we need to take action, and we can very easily make the case that this is part of a broader agenda. So I just wanted to make that point. The second thing is, in the next couple of years, we'll certainly be looking at the higher education reauthorization bill. And last year, Arnie Duncan, before he stepped down as secretary, he sort of started a new initiative, made a big speech over the summer about completion, about shifting our focus in the federal government and federal student aid programs, not away from access. Access is always going to be the core and the heart of our programs, but making sure that completion is an important part of it as well. We introduced a couple of Pell proposals to incentivize completion, getting people through fast so that they can start in the workplace sooner. And like I said in my comments just a moment ago, all of this work relates to that same point. You know, we want to make sure that students have the supports that they need. You know, Kim, I think, very eloquently made this point in her comments, so I'm not going to repeat her. But I just want to make sure everybody knows that there is opportunity to make statutory change on the horizon. And so all of the work that you all are doing, write it down. Make sure we know about it. Make sure that there's data. Make sure that it's being evaluated. And make sure that you all are making the case that this is part of a way of increasing the investment, increasing the return on investment in higher education. I think that's sort of the key piece from my perspective, at least. And then finally, just a few words on the interagency work. So our new secretary, John King, who's actually coming here in a couple of weeks to do the commencement speech, we're really proud and excited that he's doing that. He's been named the vice chair of an interagency council on homelessness. I think Kim mentioned that. And so we've sort of got a good opportunity for engagement on these sorts of issues, and in particular the homeless issue. The interagency work here is critical. This is an issue where we have to work together. The Department of Education obviously has direct equities here. And, you know, probably the biggest one, the sort of most well-known, is under the College Cost Reduction Act, under the College Cost Reduction Access Act, unaccompanied homeless youth qualify for an independent determination on the FAFSA. And I think Amy Ellen mentioned this. This is really important, and we have, I think, done a lot over the last couple of years to make sure financial aid administrators understand what this benefit means, understands what responsibilities they have under the law to make sure that students can access this if they need it and if they qualify. And that's sort of the direct place where the Department of Education through federal student aid and the FAFSA has a role here. But there are many other places where we sort of have like an indirect relationship. Chase from HUD, who's going to speak next. You know, there's lots of places where I think, you know, their programs and our programs were really written with different perspectives and objectives in mind, right? The policymaking process, unfortunately, is fairly siloed in some ways. We're trying to solve problems over here about making sure that people have enough money to get into college, right? Like that's kind of that's the main goal of the federal student aid programs. HUD has different objectives. Their goals are slightly different, and so the regulations of their programs and the regulations of our programs, they might not always match up. And so this interagency work, making sure that we're talking about those things, I think is really key. I'm really excited to continue working with my colleagues on that kind of work. I'm really excited that our leadership, like Kim, Secretary King, are also really engaged in this and committed to finding out whether there are opportunities where we can make some progress, even just in the last 8 months of this administration. So I think that's where I'll stop there, and obviously we can certainly take questions. I'm going to be here tomorrow too. I really look forward to meeting all of you. I've met you already, but I'm very excited to hear about this work. If there are any things, any sort of experiences, best practices, research, data, et cetera, please share it with me, and I will make sure that it gets into the conversation in DC. Thank you.
Great, and just to get started talking about the federal role in college student housing security, I think it's pretty clear now that this is a big issue, as many of you all see on your campuses every day. I wrote a report on this issue about a year ago, and since then it would need to be rewritten because of the extent of the new research from Wisconsin Hope Lab. Institute for College Access and Success had a report out this year in the Ellens paper. So there's a lot of good research going on that makes the case very clearly that a lot of students are experiencing significant housing insecurity. And before I get started, I'm just going to give a really quick overview of what some of the federal housing assistance programs are, because it's kind of complicated. So there's public housing, about 1 million families. There are housing choice vouchers, where families have a voucher and then can lease private housing that fits an array of requirements, about 2 million families. There's Section 8 project-based rental assistance, where the federal government has contracts with landlords to provide affordable housing. And then there's low-income housing tax credit. And that's not actually a HUD program, it's a Treasury program. And it's the nation's largest source of producing affordable housing. So the first point I want to make is just, there is a major role for the federal government to support students with housing assistance. We looked at the data last year comparing HUD data to the American Community Survey and found that 10 or 11% of HUD households have a college student. So households of college students are a big part of HUD's core population that they serve. And it's really clear that having stable housing is important for success in college. One program which you all hear about tomorrow is something that Tacoma Community College and the Tacoma Housing Authority have been doing, which is providing time-limited vouchers to students who are homeless or at risk of homelessness, and combining that with comprehensive student supports and accelerated completion. And the results from that have been really promising so far. So I think there's a lot we can learn for combining housing assistance with these other educational interventions moving forward. In general, I think we just want to make sure to target the housing assistance and align it with education and other services. For example, one slightly new thing is that there are these family unification program vouchers for former foster youth, aged 18 to 21, and this is a major group that I know a lot of campuses in UL are probably thinking about, is how to serve these students. So we need to figure out how these programs can fit together. One of the other things is aligning public benefits, which everyone else has talked about, so I'll be brief. So there is an ongoing interagency working group on public benefits for post-secondary success. I can't even say what the acronym is, but I'm sure it'll be long. So we're looking at how we can align all of these different rules, which agencies have the authority to change, as well as guidance to states. And I think there's a lot of work that we can do on that before this administration ends. So if you have thoughts, this conference just came at an amazing time to learn what we could do, so please let us know. Another thing is guidance. So clarifying the process by which students actually access benefits. One other thing which I'm excited to announce is that HUD is working with the Wisconsin Hope Lab on a guidebook for colleges and universities. about strategies for addressing housing insecurity and other living cost issues, which again, this conference will significantly inform. So I'm really excited to hear the strategies that work on your campus, and we're hopeful this will be a helpful resource complementing things that, for example, Limited Foundation has already done, that MATC has provided. So if you have thoughts, please let us know. We're working on that right now. And one last thing, data and research. Again, this was already mentioned too, but HUD does a major survey, the American Housing Survey, about housing issues across the nation. In the past, it's included questions about education. It doesn't right now. And it's at the stage in the process where it will be possible to ask about college, so you'll be able to know about all sorts of different housing issues that families who had a family member in college were experiencing. And again, just to reiterate the need for rigorous research about these different experiments, both to see what works best and in what context, and also to make the policy case for scaling up these programs. You all already know that a lot of programs you're doing have had a big success. It just seems obvious, but I think the rigorous research can really make sure it's easy to scale those up.
I'm Shannon. I'm the Public Affairs Director, USDA's Food and Nutrition Service in the Midwest region. So I just want to give a little background so you can understand what my role is and what we do at FNS. So we have 7 regions, and we don't do any direct program administration. So unlike some other federal agencies that directly administer their programs, everything that we do is through state and local partners. We provide oversight and monitoring. For public affairs, because we don't do any direct program administration, we rely on relationships with all of those partners, including food banks and related. So what I do is manage those partnerships, do outreach, and work communications and media. So one of the first things that I'll do, I'll play Debbie Downer in this panel, is provide a little bit of a reality check for those of you that are not keeping up on what's happening with SNAP. So SNAP is a great program. We have all the data that show the success stories and all the help that it provides and how it lifts Americans out of poverty. We still have a food insecurity issue in this country. Feeding America and our Economic Research Service continue to validate that. SNAP is 2% of the budget, and there have been about 25 hearings in Congress on SNAP. There are proposals to block grant it. I'm in the executive branch, so I can't comment on any of those. We work with what is, but I just want to provide that reality check. As I mentioned, 2% of the budget is SNAP, and 43% of households have earned income. If you pick up a newspaper or listen to a story or look at a Facebook meme, you'll probably not get that message. 8% of SNAP recipients are seniors. 50%, around 50% are children. These are all facts about SNAP that are not out there, and that's part of my job, is to try to get those facts out there to help provide the solid foundation to move forward, to continue to have a program that can meet the needs of the public, and also where we can look at other opportunities, such as Amy mentioned, where we look at some of those flexibilities for SNAP and some of those opportunities. So I would ask, I'll jump ahead to what you all can do, and I can't ask you or advocate that you do anything about SNAP, but I could say that if you can make sure that you have the facts about SNAP, they're on our website. I'll be here for a short time afterwards, and I'll provide you with my business card. We have an email list, so we try to make sure that we are providing on a regular basis facts about our programs. SNAP, National School Lunch Program, WIC, we provide funding and food to food banks, which indirectly supports students if they visit a food pantry or a soup kitchen. So Amy already went over the student restrictions, and I will just mention, this is one of the other things that I encounter when I'm out talking to media and the public, is we're in the executive branch, as I mentioned, and Congress is in the legislative branch. So when they create programs and laws, we're in the executive branch, we execute, so we don't have options. Sometimes we do, but if it's in the statute, we cannot waive that statute. So, and that's where the primary student language is. So I'll just leave it right there. I have a lot of people approach me with fantastic ideas for reaching out to kids or other groups, and I cannot comment on those. I can't do anything with those. The appropriate place to direct those is to elected members in the legislative branch, either in the state or the federal. That said, there are great opportunities with SNAP. Some of those have already been mentioned. ENT, so and this administration has been increasingly emphasizing the opportunities of employment and training. In past years, a lot of those state programs, so again, we don't administer those. We provide the funding and the oversight and the rules to the states that administer those programs, and they do have flexibilities and options. So one of the takeaways that I have, it's been on in the back of my mind for a while, is when I go to a lot of meetings around the region and around the country, I encounter a lot of universities and colleges that are increasingly interested in hunger and nutrition. And as I mentioned, we have a lot of networks. We have a local food network, we have a farmers market network, we have an anti-hunger network, and it's been in the back of my mind that we really need to create a university one with a number of universities that are interested in these areas. And I don't remember if it was Amy or Katherine mentioned, I think it was Amy, that we need to make sure that universities are getting information about our programs and what the opportunities are. So I did write that down, and that's one commitment that I will make, is that we are going to, in a couple months, we will have a university network so that we can share information with them and perhaps have some conference calls or meetings to talk about all these issues, make sure that they have the facts about SNAP and our other programs, and also the facts about student eligibility. And I think we can go to questions then. I usually find that these are the most interesting in determining what's available and what the facts are about SNAP.
All right. Thank you very much, panelists. We will open it up to questions now. We have a microphone running. I see one back there. Right back there also.
Oh,
Hi, everyone. So I'm a current UCLA student, and I'm part of the Bruin Shelter that's here today. My question is, for students that are eligible for public benefits, I'm going to use the A word, how do we become better advocates for those students? I myself have been to DPSS and have been legal aid for individuals and families trying to get on benefits. I'm trying to figure out more creative ways to spread knowledge through my network so that more students that are eligible may find out about these benefits.
I have to admit there's an echo, and so it was a little hard for me to understand what the question was. So as I heard it, you're asking what can students do to be better advocates to ensure that more students can access public benefits. There are tons, this is the thing that's beautiful about colleges, and I would point you in the direction of the Women Foundation has put together a handbook called Beyond Financial Aid, and one of the key authors is here, Priya Chaplat, who gets to go around the country and talk to colleges and hear about innovative things that they're doing, and so she might have something to add to this as well. But I do think it's important to educate students about what the rules are, and then engage. You may find within your own self, within your own community, then people getting ideas about what they want to pursue. Because I think a lot of the most interesting marketing and advocacy has often been bubbling up from the students and their involvement. I think about Medicaid expansion. Many of you live in states that expanded Medicaid. That was a huge deal for low-income single college students. There was much higher eligibility at that level. And so what are your, what can you do as a student community then to spread the word on campus around that? What can you do as a student community to help people understand that benefits are a normal part of needing to go to college? People do get very nervous when you start talking about welfare and you start talking about Pell. even if you're in the same room. But I think that there's been a shift around there, and that we know that Pell is insufficient to meet all these student needs, and if we want students to complete, they need to access to these other benefits. And so to talk about that as this is a normal part of the comprehensive student financial supports that students need to persist and complete is also a powerful voice that students can have. And then the other thing I would say is, one person we're missing up here is someone from the states, and I think each of the folks on this panel from the government, and particularly in Alan's case, there's a lot of power at the state level around SNAP ENT, for instance, and that students can also play a role in trying to influence how the SNAP ENT program is administered in their state, and so how many students become eligible for SNAP potentially through that process. So those are a few of the things that I would say. I encourage you to look at our website. Class, we have a lot of information about public benefits and college students and proposals out there as well.
And I would add, for hunger issues, Feeding America and your local food bank in Milwaukee would not have a more vocal, solid advocate for these issues than Sherry Tussler and Milwaukee Hunger Task Force. So connecting with the organizations that are already talking about this and advocating on it, you can also get the facts, and you can they can possibly assist you, and you'll be connected in with them. FRAC, Food Research, I always get this wrong. Action Council. That's a national organization. They have staff sprinkled around the country. That's another good organization. There are lots of them. I would encourage you to connect with them.
And one other point, talking about the local and state role, is that for housing assistance, public housing agencies at the local level have a lot of flexibility in terms of determining what their preferences are. I saw someone tweet about the long wait list for housing assistance, which is a major struggle when it's 5 to 10 years on the waiting list. Really hard to get assistance if you're a student. And I don't think very many PHAs, public housing agencies, have preferences for students. It's much more common to have a preference for a working family, which could be in some instances counterproductive if someone wanted to go back to school and upgrade their skills there for whatever reason.
Any other questions?
Hi, Katherine. It's Takia from Macy. Hi. So I'm going to frame this the nicest way that I can. Hopefully you don't hear the echo too much, but
Just speak slowly and then...
Speak slowly. Okay, I can do that. So even though there have been some strides with financial aid administrators being able to make determinations for homeless students, we still see financial aid as a huge barrier. Because if you call 10 different campuses, the policy on that campus may be, we can make a determination for you, or go get me 10 pieces of paper from somewhere else. And right now, there's no appeal process with the Department of Education, and every single day I see students that may have already started on campus.
Sorry, really quick, I did not say they should have preferences for students, just to be clear.
Oh, Chase is getting in trouble on Twitter.
Yeah, whatever that tweet was, didn't say that, yeah.
Okay,
Thank
Chase
you.
didn't say that.
Yeah, please.
Just so everyone knows that we are prohibited by law from advocating. We work with what is, not what should be. So we have to be really careful.
Yeah, so if you want to have someone who is still working on this issue, that I'm actually serious, but also joking. Thank you.
So my question is, how close are we to getting the Department of Education to intervene when campuses say, no, we don't believe you're homeless, that's your word against ours, you have no proof, and it leaves students maybe having to stop out or drop out from pursuing their higher education goals?
Yeah, I would say until Congress changes the law that prohibits the department from regulating on the needs analysis and basically how how financial aid administrators determine what you're eligible for. I mean, that's the barrier right now. I think, and I think you probably know that, but for everybody else's sort of edification, the Department of Education is allowed to regulate and issue guidance on certain things. On other things about this issue in particular, there's a prohibition on us doing more. I think we have tried, due in large part to the great advocacy of organizations like Sackett, we've pushed ourselves very hard over the last couple of years to issue more guidance so that financial aid administrators understand what their obligations and duties are under the law, and also what they're allowed to do. And my understanding of this issue is that it's in part an issue where we just need to sort of educate everybody about and sort of make them feel comfortable that they're not going to get in trouble. And so I think, one thing that we've done, we've issued a dear colleague, Macy was gracious enough to present with us last year at the National Financial Aid, FSA Financial Aid Administrator Conference. They were the only outside group that came. Because that's usually just something that the Department of Education staff, we present lots of sort of like technical assistance and guidance and lots of sessions to teach financial aid administrators about the rules. But on this particular issue, Macy's been a really great partner, and we've been able to partner with them on being more clear about what the guidance says. So, I totally share your frustration there. This is an issue. I think there's probably a little bit more that we can push ourselves to do, and we're exploring that actively. And so I'll leave it at that, but this is something that will probably come up in the next higher education reauthorization. And that's kind of why in my comments I mentioned that as a really interesting opportunity. And we're talking about it right now, or at least when I talked about it in my comments, I sort of spoke about it as an opportunity to do more, right? And to expand access and provide greater benefits, and et cetera, et cetera. It's also an opportunity to cut them back. And so that's another thing for everyone to keep in mind as you are doing this work on your campuses, as you're gathering the evidence. This is also something that we always need to continually make the case for. So thanks for giving me the opportunity to make that point as well.
I saw someone that tweeted that when did advocacy become a bad word? I just wanted to address that. It is not a bad word. It's, there's a conflict of interest, so that there's a very good reason why we can't advocate. We work in the program, so if we were advocating for the programs that we work in, like for more money, there's a conflict of interest there. So that's why we cannot. That executive branch, you can advocate with a congressional member, legislative member. Advocates can do that, that's their role. But we are prohibited by law from doing that, the three of us. So it's not a bad word, it's just that we're not able to do it.
But I can say whatever I want. Which can be good for them, but sometimes annoying as well. Tying back around these two questions together, I do think that one of the valuable strategies when we're thinking about advocacy and trying to gain more resources or gain more flexible or current rules on things is that the student base is so important. And that's true at your local level, if you're going to talk to your public housing authorities, at your state level, when you're going to talk about child care policy, and then also at the federal level, to be able to have a real student who's experiencing these things and these challenges and can speak to the importance of public benefits in their attempts to persistently complete is invaluable.
I have a two-part question regarding SNAP eligibility and on a federal level to get your perspective on. One is there some tenet or rule that would allow officers across counties that are enrolling students in SNAP benefits to communicate the idea that SNAP benefits do not affect financial aid Because it's enough that institutions aren't certain within themselves about whether it does or does not. Is there a federal perspective or those pursuing that so it's much more clear and it would benefit the students? And then secondly, regarding kind of following the DREAM Act and working with undocumented students, there's state level legislation and bills being introduced to create eligibility for college students that are undocumented to benefit from SNAP or CalFresh in California, where I'm from, with Luis Alejo and Salinas and AB 1770. Is there a federal level approach that would also reinforce support for undocumented students pursuing higher education to be eligible for benefits?
I think we all had a really hard time hearing the question.
It's about SNAP eligibility, right?
For undocumented students.
Yeah, there was the.
Yeah, so if you got it.
I think I heard parts of it. The gist is SNAP as part of the budget for determining financial assistance. Was that one piece of it?
The first part is when a student applies for financial aid, they're concerned about filling out another form that could affect it because it's a nightmare course across the field with landmines. And getting through it is enough. And they don't want to affect their financial aid package once it's finalized. And so when someone tells them they qualify for SNAP, they're afraid to even apply because they're afraid it will affect their financial aid packages to their schools. Whereas it doesn't have to. In many instances, there's language around that within financial aid offices that SNAP does not affect it. However, it's not communicated or clear. And then the second question is around eligibility for undocumented students.
So I can start with that. I think that goes back to my takeaway and my promise is to get this university network set up so that we can share that information and make sure that universities are aware of the policy in that area. That's one thing that we could do. And then for undocumented, those are federal. That's in the federal law about who's eligible. So there's not any, that's very clearly defined by Congress who is eligible. Is that, I don't know if anyone else wants to add anything.
Yeah, I think, a couple years ago, CLASP actually had this idea that we should do a toolkit for financial aid administrators to help them understand interaction. And I've written quite a bit around interaction between public benefits and federal aid and state aid and tax credits. And there is a big myth out there around SNAP and I would say also TANF, any of these benefits, that receipt of them will affect Pell Grants, and that's absolutely not the case. And so be more vociferous in terms of getting that information out to low-income students so to ensure that they can avail themselves of all the benefits they should be eligible for. And on the flip side, there is a challenge that will have to be taken up legislatively around what is considered indirect and direct expenses. And SNAP has a very narrow interpretation in terms of what's considered, and I would say narrow, which I can appreciate, but I also feel like it's sort of outdated given the college costs at this point and the eroding purchasing power of Pell, that I would argue that we shouldn't be making that argument, that delineation between what's a direct cost and an indirect cost, and if something has indirect costs, then it counts against you for qualifying for SNAP. But that's something we can talk about later because it's minutia and requires a drink maybe. But that it is important that financial administrators understand all this because and I also think it's probably our peers here from other organizations would say that it's a changing environment. As we use Luminous language, today's student, or Gates language, post-traditional student, is that more and more colleges and universities are seeing students who come in with a broader, different set of needs, or potentially come into college having received public benefits. And we need to make sure that the folks who are controlling the purse strings around Pell and that kind of thing are interpreting the law correctly.
build a little bit more into that conversation itself, something that we keep coming across is how much undergraduate and graduate students have to produce a dissertation in terms of submitting budget appeals, when we already know that either they lived in Section 8 housing before getting to college, or they're receiving either CalWorks or CalFresh or any public benefit that we already know the federal government has identified them as an area of need. But then when they come to financial aid offices and they want to request a budget appeal, for those of us that are privileged in institutions that provide budget appeals for additional support, they make them go back and get every single receipt possible and go to county office and get signatures and paperwork and so on and so forth. So in the materials that y'all have referenced, do you already speak on that in those toolkits that you're saying that you want to be creating, or in the potential university conference calls that you want to start having with the USDA? Is that going to be part of the conversation? Like, how do we harmonize that and become a little bit more fluid so the students aren't spending the majority of their first month to 2 months in college trying to get their basic needs met?
It was really hard to hear you again. I'm so sorry. It sounds fine out there, because I was out there last time, and up here it's like almost impossible to understand what people are saying. But I think you're asking about sort of the paperwork burden that financial aid administrators create for students if they're coming in and asking for appeals on something.
Well, the lack of relationship. Can you hear me with this better?
Yeah.
Okay.
Maybe
So
people
the
can
lack
ask
of
in the
relationship between if folks have already identified themselves as in need or need certified through federal support, and they come to our campuses, why doesn't campus trust those already markers? And why do students have to reproduce the entire process? And is that already in the toolkits that you're talking about? And if not, how do we get that in there? Because I know that we talked about it earlier, from the paperwork, and it also re-traumatizes students, right? To go and have to share your story every single time that you're going to different spaces. And at some point you're like, holy shit, I haven't done any homework because I'm trying to just feed myself or help myself or get the health care that I need.
Yeah. So I think on the one hand, it's sort of hard for me to comment on one particular school's process and why they may do something the way that they do. With that said, I think actually the homeless determination example and the work that we've done with folks like Sackett and Macy's is an interesting example of where if there is an issue that is being identified across a bunch of different institutions where it's making things difficult for students, we can clarify what the rights and regulations and guidance is. So, I would say I'm not quite following exactly what the issue is here. It seems like it's a little bit in the weeds and detailed, but it also sounds like it's something that we should put on our list to talk about. And I think that's a really good suggestion. And for anybody else who has, sort of other issues like that, I think Chase and I and Amy and other folks who are working on this kind of interagency work, we're putting together a list and we're going to start working through it and seeing what can be accomplished in the next 8 months.
Well, I do want to jump in here. I was going to be quiet. But I think you raise an excellent point, and one thing that we've thought about and are starting, I'd love to talk to more folks about, is this notion of right now we can use the IRS data retrieval tool to get information to populate FAFSA. What if we had information from, what if we could import information over from other departments as well? I mean, this is like big dream, big data stuff. Like what if we could automatically make low-income Pell recipients eligible for Medicaid, and rather than having them to go through those kind of hurdles? And I think that's a multi-year discussion, but trying to figure out how we overcome that burden that is really heavy on low-income students of having to continually prove their work. And the financial aid verification process doesn't do us any favors. But I know that the feds are trying to figure out better ways and encouraging institutions, because some of that is on institutions' parts, to be more considerate and in terms of what they will accept as verifying need.
So I'll just respond, and again, I guess this is Amy and I having a conversation now, but this interagency coordination, especially the data sharing, this is, one of the objectives of this interagency council on homelessness that Secretary King's vice chair now, this is one of the top things we talk about. What does that really mean? So I actually had the privilege of working on a data sharing agreement with Social Security Administration in the past year and a half. And at the bottom of it, it's called a computer matching agreement. This is really in the weeds nerd stuff here, but it's a really awesome thing that we finally got signed. It took a lot of work. It took a lot of conversations with General Counsel's office. And I will just say, so all of you guys know, these interagency data sharing agreements, they can be really tough to get because there are prohibitions on agencies using their appropriated funds for not their programs. So for other agencies' programs. So this is, a lot of the conversations that we've had so far about working with HUD or working with other agencies, why can't the Department of Education send out a letter on SNAP, for example, the problem there is that there's this prohibition on we spending Department of Education appropriated money on USDA programs. So that's one big issue which folks should start thinking about, and thinking about and I think there are ways, in the particular case that I worked on with SSA, with Social Security Administration, it was a match to find disabled borrowers who could potentially get their loans forgiven. We sort of were able to make the case to them that this was benefit their beneficiaries. So by getting this loan forgiven, by making them aware that they were eligible and potentially could get this loan discharged, that they would be able to have more money in their pocket. And that was sort of the thing that got that agreement through finally. But sometimes that's not, being able to make an argument like that isn't readily available, even though it's very clear that it would be beneficial for people to know about SNAP. So just a little bit of in the weeds Fed problems, I guess.
I have time for one more.
Would you actually mind not using it, and we'll repeat it back, just so we make sure you can hear it in time?
Yes. Two parts of the question, or maybe two questions. I'm from Northern Community College, and my first question is, what do you guys do to calculate your return on investment for these types of grants? Where do you get numbers from? Do you utilize them? Yeah, what is your return on investment?
What type of grants do you mean? Pell grants?
Everything, government, assistance for college, stuff like that. How do you calculate the return on investment in terms of tax money, government money, and how do you calculate the return, And then the second question is, what do you guys do anything about people who are struggling with student loans and have issues based on this?
Oh, that's my wheelhouse. Okay, so the first question on the return on, so I don't know if everybody heard, but one question was on, how do you calculate the return on investment in college? And the second one is about student loans. So on the first one, very smart people, not me, academics usually, put together very complicated formulas that show that for every dollar, society and the individual get some sort of return. If you're looking for the specific examples of those studies, I can certainly give you some links afterwards, and probably Sarah has them handy. But somebody else in the audience was actually talking about this about an hour or two ago, that the body of research that shows that higher education provides a very good return is very long and robust, and there isn't a lot of question about whether it's accurate. It's usually a question of how big is the return, and is the return to society or is the return to the individual, and what is the scale and what is the magnitude of those returns.
I can answer for the USDA programs. We have a lot of great research from healthcare partners and also our economic research service. So kids that are on our WIC program, they have fewer health issues, which costs well, if those babies grow up and they access Medicaid, Medicare, that's going to save money. Also, a lot of healthcare companies are partnering on our programs now because they realize they have a vested interest. If people don't experience hunger, they have fewer health issues, whether that's seniors, college students, or children. So I invite you to look at our website, and also I believe Feeding America probably has some statistics. ProMedica out of Ohio has a lot of great research on this cost savings for a really small investment in making sure that people are fed. You have health outcomes that save a lot of money, and also students perform better in class. We have data on that as well.
One other quick thing, just a point of data I found really compelling, I think a lot of folks did, policymakers, was this, and the research on that showed that it was actually a lot cheaper for the college to provide students that assistance than if the students took longer to complete. It was also an accelerated program. So I don't think that necessarily has to be the only metric, whether it's cheaper, because there's a lot of the benefits to students and society, but I think that is a case that can be made for a lot of programs. So that's something important to think about too.
Before you flip to student loans, I would also say CLASP has worked with institutions on our last project, Benefits Access for College Completion, on helping colleges develop ROI around being able to make the case that they should maintain staff who have, let's say, helped students apply for benefits or that kind of thing. So I know NOVA has some interesting work going on right now around the Working Student Success Network. I don't know if you're hooked up with that, but that I know, for institutions that make investments in these areas and decide to go the extra mile to help students, there's often the question of how is that staffer supported in the long run.
So your next question was about student loans. Can you rephrase it one more time?
What do you do with student loans, and how do you handle people who are suffering similar issues, but based off of loans?
Off of loans, sure. So, like I mentioned before, this is a lot of what I work on generally, and I think what the Obama administration has done to address the student loan crisis, quote unquote, is, we've sort of attacked it from a number of different issues. One way in which you can reduce student loan debt is by making college more affordable. So our increases in Pell Grants, our increases in the American Opportunity Tax Credit, keeping interest rates low, all of those sorts of things are geared at lowering, the amount of debt that you leave school with. Free community college obviously would decrease the amount of debt that you take on, but one of the most important components of most of the free community college proposals, including the one that the president has proposed, is that there is a state maintenance of effort provision, which would put states on the hook to try to rein in their prices at their public universities by increasing state support. We've seen that this is an often cited statistic over the last decade. States have systematically disinvested from higher education. And that has just, basically dollar for dollar gone into tuition increases that mostly has been picked up with student debt, student loans. And so that's, making sure that states are investing, making sure that we're, shoring up the Pell Grant, all sorts of things. Those all deal with student loan debt. But what do you do if you already have student loan debt and it's, you're not going to benefit from a Pell Grant, you're not going to benefit from policies that are hopefully going to ensure that states reinvest? This administration has greatly expanded the use of income-driven repayment plans to help people manage their debt after they leave school. And the income-driven repayment plans, there's quite a few of them. They're fairly confusing. We just launched a new website yesterday. You can go to studentloans.gov/repay and you can find out more information. And it's a really fancy new tool that the digital services folks helped us build that hopefully will be really easy for folks to understand what their options are. But the key thing to note is that every direct student loan borrower has a chance to cap their monthly payments at 10% of their discretionary income. And after making payments for 20 or 25 years, if you have graduate debt, you can get that remaining amount forgiven. So these are management tools to help people manage their debt if they feel like it's unmanageable. But the issue is sort of we're tackling it from all different sides. There is no one solution to this issue, and that's why You know, I think one of the things that keep coming around and saying over and over again is that this kind of work, the work around homelessness, food insecurity, around making sure that students have access to all of the public benefits that they're entitled to make sure that they have the support they need to get through school quickly. This is another way in which you can address student loan debt issues. People who default on their student loan debt, they're much more likely to have not completed a degree. And it's actually a relatively small amount. When you hear about student loan debt in the media, you think everybody has a $100,000 loan. That is absolutely crazy. That is not the norm. The average is much lower than that. And the average defaulted debt is much, much lower than the average debt. So, you know, the problem with the student loan debt crisis and the defaulters is that people are going to school and not finishing. They're not getting a credential that's worth what they need in the marketplace to get that return.
Thank you. Our next sessions are breakout sessions, and so we'll talk about a little bit of logistics after this, but I'd like to start by having everyone thank our presenters.